brands are not new, but what started to happen is that companies, instead of seeing their primary role as producing products and then branding them with a corporate identity, we're now seeing their primary role as producing brands, image, meaning, which could be stretched into many different arenas, and that producing the product was almost incidental. When you buy a pair of shoes, say a Nike pair of shoes, even though there's a Nike swoosh on it, Nike didn't make those shoes. Nike bought those shoes. And the way that they did it is probably they approached a broker in Hong Kong. And that broker in Hong Kong told them which factory could produce those shoes for the cheapest price. So the contract to make those shoes was given to a factory in China, in Vietnam, in Indonesia. But that contractor may then decide that they can even get a cheaper price by contracting with subcontract factories. And at every stage, the amount of money that goes to the workers shrinks, and you end up with this maze of contract and subcontract factories. The Nike paradigm, as it is now called, was held up as the future of the corporate world. Now, what makes a product cheaper, one product cheaper than the next? They can't scrimp too much on materials because obviously there needs to be a baseline level of quality in all the products or they're going to go out of business. So where they usually manage to get the savings is how much they pay the workers.
Human rights groups say Nike pays some workers in Asia less than $1 a day and employs child labor in some of its plants.
And part of the way that you keep wages down is by tightly controlling a workforce, making sure that they don't start forming unions and making demands for things like health care benefits, job security, more control over their lives. These goods are produced in what are called export processing zones. They're often called maquiladoras. What they are special industrial parks that have been set up especially to produce goods for export to the United States, to Canada, to Europe. They are walled in. There are high fences, and there are usually armed guards monitoring these zones. The workforce is incredibly young and almost entirely female. The dominant age is 18 to 25, and I would say that they were about 80% women. And the women who worked there didn't come from the surrounding areas. They came from provinces that were 6 or 7 hours away. This was in the Philippines and Indonesia. And the people who I met said that they felt that this was done on purpose, that they were designing a workforce that was very, very easy to control, that there was a feeling that women were easier to control than men, young women were easier to control than older women, and that girls who are far from their family and their community and their infrastructure, what makes them strong and rooted, are easier to push around. Are constantly feeling scared and unstable, and this is why it's an easier workforce to control. When Nike first started buying its shoes, importing its shoes from contractors, it was dealing primarily with Japanese manufacturers. But then producing products in Japan got too expensive, so they started giving the contracts to manufacturers in Korea and Taiwan. But then workers in Korea and Taiwan started forming unions and started getting higher wages. And Nike and Reebok and all the companies that were producing products in Korea and Taiwan weren't very pleased with this, so they canceled those contracts. Then what happened is that the companies that owned the factories in Korea and Taiwan moved to the Philippines, Vietnam, China, and opened up factories there. The governments in these countries will say, okay, well, we'll give you a 10-year tax holiday. You can come to our country, you can set up a factory, no tariffs, and we'll guard your factory and make sure no pesky union organizers even get in there. And then the company will say, and we have a docile workforce, we can give it to you for 10 cents cheaper a piece. So there's a kind of a global auction going on, and the pawns in this auction are the workers themselves. And that's why, even though the promise of globalization is that it will lead to development in poor countries and that wages will go up and the situation will improve, what's actually happening is we're witnessing a race to the bottom where countries are outbidding each other for who can abuse their workers more. But the significance for a company like Nike is that building these kind of utopian branded world costs much more than just advertising a product. So you often hear companies openly saying that we have made a choice. We have decided to build our brand. But that choice has consequences, and one of the consequences is that when that decision is made, it is often accompanied by a decision to sell off factories and to embrace the Nike model, the company that owns all this intellectual property but doesn't own any factory. When a company decides to embrace this model, that obviously immediately affects their workforces in North America and Europe. People who had steady unionized jobs, were paid enough to support a family, lose those jobs.
Cutting 6,000 jobs.
Now unemployed.
Lost another 42,000 jobs.
Cutting 11,500
Other jobs from factories across the South to plants overseas, where labor is cheaper.
The communities that were built around a factory that depended on these factories are often gutted. And the jobs that often come to replace these manufacturing jobs are these new economy jobs that are often service sector jobs. They are often temporary jobs. It's significant that in the U.S. right now, the two largest employers are Walmart and Manpower. Manpower is a company that doesn't produce anything. It supplies people. It is a temp firm, a huge temp firm. They have a roster of temporary workers that they offer to companies on short term.
If you need to move it, clean it, cater it, build it up or tear it down, and you'll get all the help you need.
The service sector jobs are often also short-term jobs, and we hear the term MIC job used to describe people who sell the products for these mega brands like Walmart, The Gap, Nike. And there's a feeling that somehow they are not real jobs. And by real job, I mean the kind of job that would have benefits, that would have some measure of security, that an adult would have, that they would be able to support kids with. In fact, there's been a kind of a campaign to see these jobs, these mall jobs, these service sector jobs that have largely replaced manufacturing jobs for the working class in the United States, a campaign to see those jobs as almost jobs with training wheels on, not real jobs. You often hear, well, I know it's kind of lousy working at McDonald's and you don't have any control over your shift and your manager doesn't respect you. And there are all these crazy rules about how you can't talk to your coworkers, but it's good experience. It's good experience for some real job down the road.
I'm Carol Martin, and this is my McDonald's.
And it strikes me that this is quite a feat on the part of these extraordinarily rich multinational corporations, that they have convinced us, and we have largely accepted this logic, that the jobs that they create should not be held to the same standards as so-called real jobs.